This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Cass Midgley and Marie Delafont.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge
$1 million
or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 241 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. This podcast is free of ads, so a big thanks to each and every one of our Patreon and PayPal supporters who keep the show going. Today, Marie Delafont and I talk with Leah Helbing. Leah is a middle-aged former evangelical homeschool mama who studied biology and secondary ed at universities in New York and Washington, D.C. From the age of 10, she dreamed of rescuing all the ill and downtrodden children of the world by studying to become a pediatrician. Those dreams died when she failed to get into medical school right out of college. Plan B? Leah rose above the discouragement and disappointment and determined that she could still save the world, one child at a time, by becoming a die-hard fundamentalist Christian. This led her on a 20-plus year journey into the domain of falsehood, deception, and tyranny. Thanks to the critical thinking skills of her oldest son, Leah has fully rejected the truth claims of Christianity. Today, she strives to make every effort to rediscover the harsh beauties of life. She counts devouring content by the likes of Hitch and Harris, marathon training, podcasts, adventuring near and abroad, growing communities of like-minded people, and quality conversation among her myriad of interests. Leah is the co-host of the podcast Women Beyond Faith, formerly started by former guest of the show, Wendy Marsman. She welcomes conversation through her Facebook site, Leah Helbing, that's LeahHelbling, or by email at leahhelbling@ymail.com. Before we get into our talk with Leah, I'm going to play Marie's monologue before mine, because I want to speak to it and some themes that come up in this conversation with Leah. So here's my wonderful co-host, Marie Delafont.
Content warning, I will be discussing the historical arc of my anxiety disorder. When you think of me, what do you think of? Oh, that Marie, she's super into talking about intersectional feminism, racism, recovering from religion, polyamory, and death. And you'd be right to summarize me thusly. However, I want to touch on another aspect of myself today, which I haven't really explored much with you guys yet. I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I was first diagnosed in 2003 when I left missions. However, over the last 16 years, I have realized that I have always had an anxiety disorder. I remember when I would close my eyes at night and see geometrical shapes pass my vision, and it would freak me the fuck out. I remember when I didn't feel well in 4th grade and just started screaming in the bathroom. It was later discovered that I had had strep throat. I remember that dumb math game where kids moved around the room from chair to chair, competing against each other to solve mathematical flashcards. I would always tremble in my seat waiting for my turn. And then I remember when I was about 12 years old and I needed to get a vaccination, and I was so terrified. I was sobbing in the hallway of the clinic, and my dad was embarrassed that his tween was crying about a measly shot. I remember when we were told that my mom was pregnant when I was about 9 years old. The following months, I was crippled with fear, feeling sure that my mom would die from the labor. The morning my sister woke me up to say Mom and Dad had gone to the hospital, I broke down crying. I remember the first time I went on a camping trip with my peers. It was 7th grade, and we drove an hour away to the site. I didn't know what to expect, but when I saw all those beds in that rustic cabin surrounded by my energetic friends, I shuddered at the thought of surviving the weekend. I begged my teachers to let me go home. Finally, they let me call my parents, and I managed to convince my dad, and he drove all the way out to pick me up. The entire drive home, I was trembling in the car from anxiety. You can imagine that as my understanding of my Christian faith congealed, the concept of hell and the gravity of thinking and believing the right things fanned the flame of anxiety already active in my DNA. The doctrine of the faith pointing to our sin and our failure only served to internalize shame, which is well known to be a trigger for anxiety and depression. In high school, I started to doubt my faith. I really felt strongly that they had no good evidence for their God, but I was living in a Christian bubble and trying to manage an undiagnosed anxiety disorder. Looking back, I wonder if my anxiety disorder played into my inability to lean into my doubts and to follow them. But I was terrified of hell. I was terrified of being wrong. I was terrified to stand up for my doubts in front of my peers, my teachers, and my parents, who all clearly knew more than me. My parents didn't think much of my behavior, and they kind of shrugged it off as an idiosyncrasy that would even out as I aged. Plus, they were very preoccupied taking care of a household of 4 kids on 1 income and sending the majority of us to private schools. It's hard to blame them. Plus, the 90s weren't really a great time for mental health acknowledgement. So I've lived with this for a while now, and the trends of what causes my anxiety are painfully clear as I review my life. I've done the best I can do to help myself and to survive. And I started therapy for the first time in 2003, and I've never stopped. Distractions along the way, like my first marriage, made it challenging to grow. And looking back, I realized that my eating disorder is likely just another symptom of my anxiety disorder. I've tried different meds, but nothing seemed to help. And then when I left Christianity, my anxiety only got worse. Initially, I thought maybe it was because I had rejected the Holy Spirit, and that this is what that feels like. My therapist diagnosed me with an anxiety disorder, which shocked me at the time. It was the first time I heard a message that said, "It's not your fault. You're not a failure." The anxiety disorder itself never really got the attention it deserved until I had my first major panic attack in October of 2008, when I went to the hospital because I was afraid I was having a stroke. 3 hours in the ER later, finally, a doctor saw me and had me checked for a pulmonary embolism, and then they sent me on my merry way, declaring that I'd just had a panic attack. The next year, I was scared of everything. I was constantly in a state of panic, afraid of panic itself. The grip of it was unrelenting. Leaving my unhealthy marriage helped a bit. Marrying my current partner helped a bit, but starting treatment for my eating disorder in 2010 was the start of my serious work. It was there that I learned about mindfulness, about noticing your thoughts without judgment. It was there where I learned about paying attention to your body, something not encouraged in religion, where the body is evil and leads you to indulgences and sins. That was where I learned about dialectical behavioral therapy, which posits that opposites can both be true. This was my first exposure to an agnostic mind, a gray way of thinking, when I had been so black and white up until then. It was there that I learned about self-care, about how to manage your anxiety using different cognitive skills, about how to keep up with your bodily needs like taking your meds, staying hydrated, eating 3 meals a day. My knowledge and strength increased, but I also struggled not to make my efforts black and white. I would struggle feeling like I was failing at mindfulness, failing at self-care, failing to take care of my body. And I still struggle with that. In November of 2013, my anxiety hit a peak due to the circumstances that I was in, and resulted in the worst depression I've experienced, resulting again in my desire to not want to be alive anymore. Gratefully, my therapist saw that this was happening and got me on the phone with a partial hospitalization program immediately. I applied for medical leave at work and went into treatment for 3 months. At the hospital, I was finally treated for my anxiety and panic disorders. I learned so much about the physiology of the body during panic. I learned about the particulars of my disorder, the triggers, what helps, what makes things worse. We wrote it all down. We invited family and friends in, and we shared this information with them. I left my job, vowing never, ever to let anything be a higher priority than my well-being. I got a new job. I started a reconciliation with exercise, which has helped ultimately manage my anxiety in a very physical way. I started diving into one of the largest sources of my anxiety, being religious trauma and related sexual abuse. So, you'd think, after this arc, I would be fully owning my disorder and unapologetic about it. I thought I was too. But Dateboy and I had plans to go to Kansas City this past weekend, and I started feeling anxiety at least 2 weeks beforehand. One of my triggers for anxiety is travel. Another way to compound on that is traveling with someone. I found myself surprised in experiencing deep fear of what he'd think of me if I told him about all the triggers I was anticipating on this trip and trying to get him to sign on to support me. I felt so embarrassed by my disorders. I was sure that he would think I was crazy, high maintenance, codependent, or dramatic. And I was so surprised to experience this fear. I don't have this fear with my husband or my boyfriend Snacks, but I did have it when I met my first husband. Oh, and I did have it when I met my current husband, and I totally had it when I met Snacks, and here it is now with Dateboy. It's a fear that I am too much, that my humanity, which includes my anxiety disorder, which includes the coping skills for it, that it's all too much. I was so scared to communicate this all to Dateboy, to spell out this disorder that is a constant fixture in my life, to spell out the kind of support that I'd like from him. But what are the options, I asked myself? I could either hide who I am, and this relationship could continue under false pretenses, or I could let it all spill out. If I let it spill out, he could decide that I'm too complicated, and that he doesn't want to deal with that. He could. Or he could see my humanity, embrace my humanity, and support me however he is able to. And that's what happened. I ended up writing a document for him before we traveled, detailing the various triggers that I have, as well as possible ways to support me. The weekend was so much fun. I felt so much safer. I felt seen. I felt understood. I felt accepted. I felt supported. I spoke up for myself in so many ways, each time an achievement, as I usually struggle to ask for what I need when I'm hit with anxiety. On Sunday night last weekend, my anxiety was unbearable, and every sound made my head feel like it was going to explode. From all the work that I had done to prepare Dateboy for my anxiety, I knew exactly what I needed. I turned to him and I said, "I think we need to go to a hotel for the night." He said, "Okay." And we left the party and we went to a hotel. And once we were there, I finally felt my brain release me. I felt my body relax. I felt my head start to clear. I'm learning that shame about my anxiety disorder can go fuck itself. That the skills I've learned to manage it fucking work. Asking for what I need fucking works. Educating my partners and friends on my anxiety fucking works. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to overcome this anxiety disorder. It's true what I've seen a million times. True strength is in asking for help. And now on to some announcements. I just wanted to let you know that, hey, we still have some pretty great merch. We've got some stickers and some magnets, and you can check those out on everyone'sagnostic.com. And also, I want to promote a podcast that I learned about this week. It's called Conversations with God. And those of us who are Christian might feel triggered by that. There was kind of a new age-ish, sort of Christianish book. And it was pretty nuanced and progressive at the time, but it was still, God was still a part of it. But anyway, that's not this. It's this guy from, I think he's from the UK. He's got a lovely British accent, and he does this production all by himself, I think, where he basically has him and his guest, which is God, and it's the Christian God, it seems, that he interviews and he talks to, and he goes through the Bible and asks God questions, and God gets to respond, and usually God has no really good answers, and it's just it was really cathartic for me to listen to and just to hear someone say the things to God that we've probably all been saying when we had our doubts, but in this instance he talks back and says kind of the things that you would expect from, the kind of personality the Bible really does paint God to be. So I want to encourage you guys to check out the podcast called Conversations with God. It's on iTunes. The episodes come out twice a month, and they're about 20 minutes long, and they're very funny, and the production value is really high. So check that out. If you want to contact us for any reason at all, if you want to be involved in our community, we have a private Facebook group. We also have a virtual support group, and we have a Google sexuality discussion group. You can be added to any of those if you email us at everyone'sagnostic@gmail.com, or you can follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And lastly, I want to say hello to our listeners in France. Merci d'avoir écouté à de dire oui à ce que est. I know that was so bad. I'm a Spanish speaker, not French. But France, thanks for listening.
One thing I love about leaving magical thinking and superimposing life with grand meanings that aren't real is this: embracing the truth, embracing what is, saying yes to what is. When it's all said and done, no saying is cowardly. It's perpetual infantilism. It's keeping a heavenly parent around long after we're supposed to grow out of our parents. When we're honest about things, as hard as that is, we get the opportunity to see each other as human beings, creatures with beautiful flaws, shortcomings, and, if you will, sins that are part of the truth, that when sacrificed on the altar of something to which to be ashamed, we miss out on the glorious opportunity to extend love, empathy, and compassion toward one another and ourselves. It's no wonder, really, that people whose lives are imprisoned in the Christian narrative are quick to other people that remind them of things they don't like about themselves or their own humanity. Why else do they seek such safe, homogeneous, purified, sanctified spaces? To them, our very existence, especially those of us who expressly deny the God narrative, creates an awkward, uncomfortable, and annoying reminder of reality. Marie's monologue expressing her lifelong endurance of anxiety and, mental illness made me wish that I had hugged her longer in Kansas City this last weekend. Compassion, love, and familial embrace was what I felt as I heard her share so candidly. the opposite of repulsion, disgust, or annoyance. We are discovering that we're okay. It's okay to be human. And let me say that again. It's okay to be human. It's not really good or bad because those are judgmental terms and binary. We just are. It just is. And we're saying yes where God said no. The Bible said no. We're finding that the most toxic things about our lives is not that we're flawed, but that we were taught that it was bad to be flawed. Christianity taught us to have a problem with having a problem. In a way, we have to get over Christianity's dismissive, debasing view of ourselves before we can really start to address the issues that are real. And even then, there's no shame in those issues. After 5 years of doing this podcast, I'm realizing that there is no end to the handicaps that Christianity gave us toward greater and greater wholeness and healing. Leah talks about having to reimagine herself as a woman because of the toxicity of the Christian view of women. The same is true of mothering, of being a wife, and ultimately of being a human being. Now we're starting to dig ourselves out of the rubble of the Christianity that imploded before our eyes, just so we can begin the work of saying yes to what is and responding accordingly. Before I read this passage from Colossians chapter 3, consider this. Heaven is not real. Earth is. We are not dead or hidden. We are here. There's nothing wrong with us, other than thinking there's something wrong with us. We are not to wait for life or postpone our lives. It's already here and happening before our eyes. We can trust our eyes, and that things are pretty much as they seem, as opposed to needing faith to be certain of what we cannot see. Colossians 3, 2-4 says this, "Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, for you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory." Unquote. No, no, no. The exact opposite is true. Set your mind on earthly things, otherwise known as reality. I haven't died yet. As much as Christianity wants to be rid of me or hide me, I'm here. See me. Don't hide me. I'm already here. Christ is not my life. I am my life. Don't run from me. Don't turn away. This was Marie's hope when she was going to share 7 intimate hours in a car with Date Boy. See me, and please don't turn away. This is Leah's hope to her husband and children. See me, and recognize my powerful contribution to this family. This is what I'm saying to those who would be my community. See me, get to know me, and once you do, I hope you can stay in this with me. In all 3 cases, we know we'd be okay if you don't accept us or see us. But let's start with honesty. Let's start with no pretense, unhidden, not waiting for the afterlife to accept ourselves or each other, because there's not one. It's just us here, and this moment is all there is. Say yes to what is, say yes to me, say yes to Marie, say yes to Leah, grow a pair, and say yes to difference, diversity, different colored skin, ethnicities, orientations, genders, languages, cultures. Grow the fuck up. Open your eyes and realize no God is going to rescue the earth from climate change that we're causing, or the cancer that we are as human beings to the ecosystem because of our blind, chosen ignorance and irresponsibility. Enough with the fairy tales and security blankets, the constant wishing that things were different, the burying of heads in sand to avoid seeing the inconvenient truths of reality. Problems don't get solved by imagining they don't exist. We ex-Christians are emerging from the rubble of devastation that magical thinking did to us. We're embracing our humanity, our gender, sexuality, mental illnesses, emotional wounds, and flaws, and we're doing something about them, not because they're ugly or wrong, but because we're worthy of self-care, tenderness, embracing, and acknowledging the beauty of what it means to be human. Fuck off reality-denying creeds and doctrines that only tolerate us by holding their nose and turning their heads. We are not hidden from you. We are here, and so are you. Fuck your judgment. Fuck your shame. No wonder gay prides and Mardi Gras and coming outs can sometimes be extravagant and ostentatious because we're busting out of religious attempts to hide us, bury us, or sequester us, and we're sick and tired of suffocating under the rubble of your broken man-made system that's imploding on all of us. Stop fighting what is, stop saying no to reality, and join the human race. Join us as we seek to make the best of things, eyes wide open, inclusive, expansive, and affirmative. We taped this conversation on March 31st, 2019. The intro music on this episode is Just Groove Me by Dave Weckl. The segue music is The Loop by the 77s off the best Christian album of all time, Sticks and Stones. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. How old's your daughter that has the YouTube?
She's 20.
All right.
She started doing that when she was like 14 and like hit like kind of like fashion and beauty and really like was doing really well, like over 100,000 subscribers. And anyway, long story short, she quit for a year. She was making like $700 to $1,000 a month income. At like 16, 17.
From ads? From like the YouTube ads?
Yeah, exactly.
So she'd get a check from YouTube?
Yep. Well, not from YouTube, from like a third party talent organization, you know, that was kind of like her contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
Yeah.
What's the name of it?
What is the name of it? I think it's Emma Catherine 09 or something, or Emma Catherine with a C.
Yeah, 09.
Yeah. So she just kind of started back up about 9 months ago, and she lost a lot. You know, she lost a lot of subscribers and she lost a lot of cash.
Oh, it's firing up again. Turn off my speaker.
She's got good video editing skills.
She does.
So, Leah, I think I have, and this is probably true of a lot of people, but there's a couple of people that come to mind, and you're definitely one of them, of somebody who I wish that I had gotten to know or spent more time with on the retreat and didn't. And so, like, we've spent the weekend in the same house, but yet I really don't know you very well. So, my bad.
Hey, there were so many people. I feel like that with both you and Marie.
Yeah.
You know?
When Marie came out of her locked room, and we...
You're exaggerating.
A part of me, I didn't know what to do, how to act, who to engage with, how much to...
Yeah.
It was weird and awkward, but good news. We're doing another one, and you're on the planning committee, and it's going to be much less awkward this time.
Yes.
For sure.
It's going to be really well organized. It's going to be good.
Yeah, it's going to be damn good. I tell you, Charles, the other night, he had like 3 freaking spreadsheets.
I don't know what he does for a career.
I think he's an accountant by trade.
Yeah, he is. So let's just jump into your story, I guess.
Sounds good.
You were not raised in a religious home. You were raised by hippies.
Correct.
And not the Jesus freak kind of hippies.
Not the Jesus freak kind of hippies. So like my dad's parents converted to Christianity like when my dad was about 2. And his name was Gordon. His next sister was Gladys. And then they converted to Christianity. And the next 10 children, you know, all have Bible names, you know, Matthew, Mark, Stephen, Philip, Anna, whatever. And so my dad kind of rebelled against that from a young age. My parents got pregnant with me, you know, like right out of high school, got married. If it hadn't have been for me, they probably wouldn't have ended up together long term, you know.
It's your fault.
It's my fault. I know. I felt that for 47 years. Thank you very much.
They're still together?
No, they are not. They divorced about 20 years into their marriage, and my dad has since passed. He's been gone about 6 years.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's rough, but not as rough as your situation, Cass, losing your dad as a teen, you know?
Yeah.
For sure.
I win. I win the sad award.
Yeah, you win. You win. My mom, on the other hand, her mom died when my mom was 16. Has struggled through a cancer battle, so she kind of can relate to your situation, you know. But yeah, so we didn't have religion in my home, you know, and up until we would go visit my grandparents. They only lived about 5 miles away, so we spent a lot of time there. Mm-hmm. We were very close with my my aunts and uncles and my grandparents, and they lived on a farm, so we would go up there and, you know, work in the fields. And whenever we were there, there was prayer and singing and Bible reading around the kitchen table, the dinner table. And it was kind of a conundrum for me, you know, like my parents' relationship was very unstable. You know, it wasn't a healthy relationship. And there was a lot of, I don't know, just feelings from a kid of instability and insecurity, you know, but at my grandparents' house, you know, there was all kinds of shit going on behind the scenes that I was unaware of until I was an adult. You know, lots of sexual molestation taking place amongst siblings, but I didn't know that as a kid, right? And so when I would go there, there was like this peace. I just felt this peace and this comfort and this security to just kind of be me and to be accepted for who I was there. And so I used to go to vacation Bible school, you know, with my aunts. And so I was getting this message that I wasn't good without God. But then there was also that feeling of fitting in, you know, and finding my space when I was at my grandparents' house. And so I think I thought that was Jesus. I thought that was faith.
Well, and you could fit in better if you marched to their drum too. I mean, and the instability of your own home, it's like this kind of felt good. The stability, the structures are one of the main reasons that religion is successful in people's lives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And they loved me like no other. Like I was the first grandchild. And they all just loved and adored me, you know, like the amount of love that I received from my grandparents and from my aunts and my uncles was just out of this world. And, you know, so all those pieces kind of had to come together.
So those seeds were sown, like as a child, you're hearing the Bible and you're seeing the stability of Christianity and the love of Jesus shared amongst the community. So fast forward to the time that you accepted Jesus personally.
Sure thing. I was a freshman in college, had gone to a small Christian college in New York to play basketball, got a scholarship there, was playing basketball there. And, you know, and so now I'm surrounded by Christians 24/7. Yeah. You know, my coach's family, you know, the chaplain of the team, all of my teammates, my dorm mates, we had to go to chapel 3 days a week. So now this story that I had heard about, you know, at my grandparents' house was being reiterated to me, you know, day after day, hour after hour.
Now, why did you choose that college?
The basketball scholarship.
Okay.
And at the time, my boyfriend at the time was going to college, you know, a hop, skip, and a jump away from where that school was located.
Oh, quick question. So since you hadn't totally emotionally invested into the religion quite yet, and that it was more this compartmentalized grandpa's house kind of thing, and you had a boyfriend, did you get lost into the purity culture, or were you having premarital sex with your boyfriend?
I was definitely having premarital sex with my boyfriend.
For you?
Yes, which was a huge source of shame for me at the time.
Oh, hell
yes. Yeah. Even though I hadn't bought into the culture, right? I had aunts. I had an aunt that was my age, and then I had like 4 aunts that were like, you know, between 5 and 6 years older than me. And there was one occasion I can recall, I was probably 16 or 17, and I ended up in a car with them driving from my grandparents' house to one of my aunt's homes. And they started this conversation about saving yourself until marriage. You know, like it wasn't necessarily directed at me, but I think it was, right? And at the time it was already too late. You know, I was already having sex. I was already going to hell, and I was already a sinner. And so like I feel like there was always some sort of shame associated, not just with my sexuality, you know, but from not being a part of that culture, not fully diving in and saying yes to Jesus, you know, as they so wanted me to do. So, so that was a reason why I chose that college too. So he and I could continue to have sex, you know.
Yeah.
During my first semester of my freshman year, I broke up with said boyfriend to date another guy. and started going out and partying and drinking a lot. And I ended up with a DUI.
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah, between semesters. And so I'm up there for college. We got practice over break, and I get a DUI, and I'm all by myself, and who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to tell? And I just had all of this angst and anxiety just building up within me, and was laying down in bed one night, and my stomach was just on fire, just churning, and all this anxiety. And I just reached out to God, and I said, if you're real, just help me through this, and I will follow you all the days of my life. And so, the pain subsided. I don't know how long it actually took for it to subside, but it subsided. And from that day forward, I was going to walk this walk and talk this talk and be a part of it.
Wow. So it was a decision that you convinced yourself into. It didn't sound like anyone was manipulating you in so much as like you were surrounded by the culture, but what it took for you to finally commit to it was just like your own internal pressure, and the stress that you were under made you choose to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
As opposed to an altar call.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. In the shame, for all of this shame that I had felt subconsciously for years, not only was I having sex, out of wedlock, but now here I was out drinking underage and getting a DUI and driving while intoxicated, so I think just all of this shame that I felt about being a piece of shit person. And that really bothered me, internally.
I can see where if I were, sometimes those hardships that would come upon me, I would go to that scripture that said God chastises those he loves, like he disciplines those he loves. And so it was an honor for God to care so much about me that he would throw me into, some kind of hardship or a painful situation just to get my attention to turn from my, my current trajectory. So he was protecting me from my sin and myself.
Yeah.
Like a DUI would be like, okay, this is God trying to get my attention, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wake up, Leah. I'm calling you.
Here I am.
Yeah. And I mean, that was a really big deal at my little Christian college, right? Like I had to go meet with the dean of students. I had to meet with the president of the university. They had to decide whether or not they were going to allow me to continue to be a student and to be a part of the basketball team. My coach had to say, yeah, let's give Leah another chance here, and
did he?
He did. Okay. Yeah.
You stayed on?
I stayed on. Yeah. And that following semester, my parents had this tumultuous relationship, and my parents announced in February or March that they were divorcing, after nearly 20 years of marriage. And right about that same time, my dad found Jesus again. So my dad, who had left this huge wake of destruction in his walk of life for those last 2 decades, was now finding his way back to truth. So that kind of reiterated to me that, yes, this was the right decision you made, Leah. Look, Dad is now coming back to Jesus too, and going to set his life straight. And so, again, all these things that have to just find their way in line in order for us to make these crazy life decisions that we make some days. It's just mind-blowing to me as I kind of reflect,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about your reflections then on that time period of, the choices that you made with your boyfriend, the new boyfriend that you had, the premarital sex that you had, the DUI that you had, the partying, the, noticing your dad reconverting. When you look back at it now without that lens of understanding that all these things were done to challenge you or to help you grow or whatever, how do you see yourself having gotten through that? And what is the news story that you tell to yourself about that period of time, if you do have one?
Yeah, I've got a 22-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 17-year-old, almost 18-year-old kid, and they're awesome kids. And just watching them maneuver the waters of adulthood, young adulthood, trying to figure out who they are as a person, what they stand for. I think part of that was all just who am I? What do I want to do? What do I want my life to be? What are my dreams? And my parents, I really feel like I kind of raised myself during those teen years. And so I have a lot of grace, and I have a lot of compassion, I think, and empathy for my younger self. just I was doing the damn best job I could with the tools that I had at the time.
That's powerful. Do you have any siblings?
I do. I'm the oldest of 5.
What's the distance between you and your next sibling?
So my brother Jake and I are about 16 months apart.
Okay, so pretty quickly after they had you.
Yeah, but then there's 10 years between the next sibling.
Wow.
Oh, wow, yeah. So the two of you, okay. So they figured out what was causing it and then put a stop to it for a little bit, thinking we're going to have a child every 15 months if we don't figure this out. I'm speaking from experience. That's my wife.
Oh, God.
Story. But seriously, my kids are all 15, 17, and 22 months apart.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Dang. Yeah, and I think so I have my 3 siblings are like 10, 12, and 14 years younger than I am. Mm-hmm. And I think those were my parents kind of trying to start their relationship anew and, kind of rekindling the love and rekindling some hope that things could maybe be different in their relationship. Mm-hmm. And so those were definitely some, for me, my dad was mostly absent as a kid, like emotionally and physically as a support system. And so I bore the brunt of those younger children. I was babysitting all the time and caring for them while my mom went to work. And, I don't regret that at all. I think it was pretty neat and kind of special. And it helped me to become a better parent when it was time for me to have kids, but it definitely transformed my world and my responsibilities, as a 10, 12, 14, 16, 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Sure. So did you graduate from that Christian college?
I did. I graduated with a degree in biology as a pre-med student and had planned to go to medical school and was on the waiting list to get into medical school that first year out of college and did not get in. And so kind of went off, did some other ventures in the medical field for a while, started studying a master's of education and decided I didn't really want to be a teacher either. My husband and I were married by that time, obviously, and were unexpectedly expecting early on in our marriage. And then I've been a stay-at-home mom for 21 years.
How'd you meet your husband?
My husband, sophomore year, I was a Jesus-loving freak by that time. He was a transfer student to the university. He came in to play basketball. So my roommate and she was dating another guy on the basketball team. We went down to the gym a day before classes start just to shoot hoops. And there's this new guy on campus with some sexy ass legs. And so I just looked at him and I was like, yeah, I need to get to know this guy. So it wasn't long after then that we were dating and having sex and all that fun stuff.
That was what I was going to ask next. I was like, so did you learn your lesson or what?
We didn't do too well. We would, have sex on a Saturday night and then go to church on a Sunday morning.
Oh, good for you.
So how much shame were you feeling though on that Sunday morning
I don't think we were feeling much shame.
Okay.
I don't recall feeling too much shame.
Yeah, there was all the whole spectrum of Christians, and there still is. But I mean, my experience was there were some that just really took that whole purity thing serious, and others just said, "This is something that we don't think God really cares that much about." And so, Christians can smorgasbord and pick their battles and pick their sins, and of course, there's always those that stand in judgment and say you can't just pick. Which sin, but yeah, some of us did. And you're so much emotionally healthier for it because Mindy and I, were sexually active before marriage. We dated almost 5 years and we would go like months and just, fight, stay pure. And then fall, if you will. And then just be full of shame and then stick it out for another 3 months and then fall. And you can imagine, then there were times when we got so tired of that gerbil wheel or, that treadmill that we just said, fuck it, and got on the pill and just, she came to my dorm room and stayed the night and came to our apartment and we stayed night after night together, et cetera, and just gave up. And then we'd hit I don't know, go to some kind of retreat or festival or something where some speaker, some preacher on the stage would convict us, and we'd go back to trying to be pure. And it's just like that. That's a 5-year cycle, such that, by the time we got past the wedding and it was all good in God's eyes, there was still a lot of baggage there. And I will say candidly that 30 years into it, there's still baggage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That is associated. So Pavlov's dog, was about ring a bell and then feed him, ring a bell and then feed him, such that when the bell rang, the dog would salivate because it associated bells with food. And so if you have sex and you have shame, and you have sex and you have shame, then you it's hard to separate. It's hard to ever see sex as a shameless, proud, beautiful, wonderful, wild and free and human and animalistic act.
Preach it.
That's a long journey.
Yeah. It is. And my husband, I don't think we felt much shame about the two of us having sex, but I felt a lot of shame. He hadn't been sexually active before he met me, so I was the one that, brought him down into this hole of shame and sin. But there was always this sense of shame that I felt for being sexually active with other people prior to him. And so that was where I found my shame. Yeah. And that is, still cast, like you mentioned, like 25 years into our marriage and almost 30 years into our relationship, right? That it's not so bad now, but like there was a time like after we'd been married for 10, 15 years, and I would go back home to visit my family, and may encounter one of my previous relationships, and it would be like him, shaming me all over again, maybe you'll see so-and-so. And
wait, your husband would say that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So we dealt with shame in different pieces, than you and Mindy did. And just that shame piece. I mean, and so much as a parent, on this side, like not wanting to place that upon my children at all, to allow them the freedom to just explore without judgment. And you do your thing, you figure this out, no shame. It's such a beautiful place to be as a parent, and I'm sure they're still going to have some sorts of shame that they're dealing with in therapy for when they're older, but hopefully that won't be one of them.
Right.
But you're having that conversation with them, which is like light years ahead of anything that we were taught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're encouraging them not to have shame, which that would have never, ever happened to me in the way I was raised.
Yeah.
I think the point you just made, as far as your kids are going to experience some form of shame. And I think the point is that with all human experience, nobody comes through unscathed. It's a mess. You're going to get hurt. You're going to have shame. You're going to hurt others. You're going to have this or that. And my point is that life's already too fucking hard to be complicated by more shit piled on by religion.
Amen, brother.
Come on then.
Preach it.
Well,
preach it, brother.
It's unnecessary. Absolutely.
So you and your husband were, you were Christians when you married.
Correct.
And for some reason, you weren't using enough protection. You had an accidental pregnancy after post-marriage.
Yeah.
How many kids do you have?
Yeah, 3 pretty awesome kids.
And are they all out of the house? Are you empty nesters or?
Not yet, but we will be come August the 1st. Hallelujah and amen.
Looking forward to that, are we?
Yes. My husband and I are looking forward to that.
In your family, I understand from reading your bio that you weren't the first one to initiate departure or doubt entertaining thinkings that would begin to deconstruct your faith. Who was the instigator of debauchery and apostasy?
I tell you, so once my husband and I had kids, we decided we had to be all into this faith thing. If this was the way that life was to be lived, we had to be all in. Me more so than him, and the responsibility for educating our children and and teaching and training them in the way that they should go so they would not depart from it,
Right. And the importance of finding a good church.
Yeah, so we jumped in with both feet, and, that led us to homeschooling our kids, for educational purposes, but, when they were young, primarily to keep them kind of protected from the evils that were in public school. Our homeschooling endeavors, it's kind of amusing to me when I kind of look back at it, because we kind of homeschooled our children like hippies would have and do, like secular homeschoolers. Like, we did a homeschooling method called unschooling, which is kind of where you allow your kid to kind of think independently, separate from the parents and the authoritarian influences, and kind of dive deep into the areas that they find interesting and exciting, the things that they want to learn about. Mm-hmm. So, like, instead of learning, world history, like a quarter of an inch thick, like if they're really fascinated by Roman history, man, they can take the whole semester and just, dive deeply into that. And so that process, that sort of homeschooling, kind of tends to allow your kids to question authority, and kind of allows your kids to kind of have more of an equal playing field amongst the adults and in the family situation. And so our kids kind of could say and felt comfortable saying whatever it was that they felt comfortable wanted to say. There was no qualms about, I can't say that because mom and dad are going to be pissed at me, or mom and dad are going to think I'm going to hell. And so in our homeschool community, we live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the Ark Encounter, well, not the Ark Encounter, the Creation Museum was being built and was kind of coming to fruition. It was opening, and a number of people in our church and homeschool community were like, they had these charter memberships where they offered these outreach passes. So like if you gave $1,000 to the Creation Museum, you received these passes that were good for a lifetime that you could give to friends and family as like an outreach evangelism ministry. And so my husband was a school teacher. I was a stay-at-home mom. So money was always, short to come by. And so free field trips, we were always up for free field trips. And so we had a number of friends that would loan us their Creation Museum passes. Now, I'm a biology major, right? And I believed in evolution and I really had never even heard about young earth creationism, despite the fact that I went to a Christian college,
that's crazy.
But it was more of a progressive, I guess, Christian college, or at least the professors I had in the science department were more progressive. There was never any mention about young earth creationism. And so as our homeschool friends and are kind of like, in this is all in the news, the Creation Museum, I was like, what the hell is this place? And so we would go visit, and it was really an awesome museum. Lots of real neat hands-on activities and cool fossils. And after one of these visits, my son, who at the time was maybe like 11 or 12, he was like, hey, Mom, do you think that just you and I could go back? He's my oldest. Could we go back there without the girls so we can really just kind of study and look at this section of the museum a little bit more in depth? He's like, it doesn't really make sense, and blah, blah, blah. So it took us a little while to get back there, to find babysitting and to get back to the museum. But so the particular exhibit he wanted to go to is this section that kind of tries to explain what happened after the flood. And so how did the animals populate all of the continents so quickly after the flood, And so the hypothesis that's presented here is that there were these land and like tree masses that just floated across the oceans. From where Noah was, to Australia and to South America, all over the place, in a matter of hundreds or however many years. And so I'm trying to explain this to him as his teacher and Christian authority figure. And I'm reading the exhibit and trying to argue. And I hadn't bought into all of this, but if you were a good Christian homeschool mama at that time in my community, you were a young earth creationist believer. You bought into that. And so we're kind of talking about this, and I'm just looking at him quizzically and so it doesn't really make sense, does it? And so that led him on this exploration, and at the time, the internet was available, and he was a bright kid, and he was just diving deep into debates and conversations between theologians and secularists and atheists. And so not long after that, he kind of came out and said, I don't really believe any of this is true. And, as a 12-year-old. And so me as his mother and authority figure and primary teacher was so taken aback by that. I did not know how to respond. I was worried and, oh my gosh, here I have done all these things correctly, or so I thought as a parent, and how now my son is like, falling into atheism. But my husband, bless his soul, did not feel intimidated, was not insecure, did not feel like his foundation was being crumbled. He was able to really enter into that with Josh. They would go camping down the Smoky Mountains every summer. And so Dave's like, hey, Josh, why don't you, kind of burn a couple CDs of those conversations you've been listening to with, these debates, and we'll listen to them, on the drive down and talk about them when we're there. And so they did just that. And they come back from this trip, and Dave looks at me and he's like, Leah, Josh has some really good points that he's making here.
Oh,
yeah. So that led to Dave kind of going down that journey, and him being a non-believer, and me just feeling totally alone, to raise my girls alone without my faithful Christian husband to lead us in this endeavor. And those were some rough years, in our marriage.
So how many years and what years were they, ballpark?
Oh my gosh. So Josh is 22 now. So that was about 10 years ago. Okay. So that would be 2009. So then my husband kind of went through this journey, probably the next 2 years. And then I finally felt comfortable enough to enter in, not threatened, like as a mom. And like I had all this pressure. Something I always struggled with in my faith walk was the need to be perfect. The perfect mom, the perfect wife, the perfect daughter, the perfect friend, the perfect Beth Moore Bible study leader, everything, right? Yep. The best prayer warrior there was, like this perfection shit. Yep. And so as a parent, I think I felt that the most. Yep. Like these are my pride and joy, and so it was very difficult for me to enter in to Josh and Dave's life at that time. And I think there was a fear. Like I always had questions. There were always things that never made any sense to me. And actually that first semester that I was a Christian, I think is a kind of an interesting piece of my story, because my exposure to Christianity was my grandparents and this little Christian college. And it seemed like everybody kind of did life the same way. It seemed like there were these similarities of how you live life as a Christian. Well, that spring semester, Bart Campolo's dad, Tony Campolo, was a speaker at chapel one day. And so Bart's a friend of mine right here in Cincinnati, and we're building this humanist community together. And so at the time when Tony Campolo was coming to speak, there was like this, people were not happy he was coming. Some people in the college were unhappy that someone like Tony Campolo would be coming to speak at our college. He was too progressive.
Yeah, he's progressive in the evangelical community very much. Yeah.
Exactly. And I didn't get that. I'm like a new Christian here. I'm like, well, I thought we all believed the same things and we were on each other's teams here. What the hell is going on? And so that early on in my faith was just kind of like I don't understand how we can all be Christians, but have this wide range of actual beliefs and how we live this out day to day,
I can see how that would be disturbing at first, because there's division in the ranks. It's the first time that you've seen like there's rifts and sects and schisms, right? Whereas at your grandmother's house, everybody was kind of cohesive and uniform and tight. Yeah. So that would throw you. And I think going back to your perfection model, I just want to emphasize that is so common, and especially among women. For some reason, it's like that's a burden that they carry. And I could feel, I haven't quite got to, your son was 10 years ago, your husband was about 8 years ago, and I'm curious still as to when you actually aligned with them.
Yeah, well, I did some deep diving alone for years.
Do you have an idea of like when you said, yep, that's it, I don't believe anymore?
Yeah, I would say I was out for lunch with a girlfriend, a girlfriend that I had led in Bible study. I was always the Bible study leader. And we'd been friends for like 18 years. And we were out for lunch, and her husband had gone through a number of different journeys, from evangelicalism to Greek Orthodoxy to Catholicism to Episcopalism. So, we have had these conversations pertaining to him. And she was a safe person that I could express my doubts and concerns with, and she was praying for Josh and for Dave, on a regular basis. And so we were out to lunch one day and chatting about something, and like, she asked me, she's like, Leah, so what is it that you believe now today? And so she was the first person that actually asked that direct question to me. And so it kind of just caused me to pause and to kind of like, I had all of these pieces of the puzzle in my head, but I hadn't put them all together, to say the words. And so it took me a few seconds, maybe more than a few seconds. And I just said, you know what? I don't believe any of it anymore. So that was probably 4.5, 5 years ago.
Okay.
Wow.
So that means that there was a 4 to 5, or let's see, 4-year period where you and your husband were kind of at odds.
Yeah.
And I guess what I mean by that perfection thing, in light of the fact that your son has kind of drifted away, and now and it's in the evangelical world, we could say that your husband really dropped the man ball, because he's supposed to be the spiritual leader of the house.
God damn right he did.
Yeah. And he wussied out, and he's not, I mean, he wouldn't last 10 seconds at a Promise Keepers rally,
Good for him.
So, but that I can see, I think about the spinning plates metaphor or something, where you have to keep everything going, and you are now the cohesive glue of the family since he's dropped the ball.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to keep the image up amongst your homeschooler, peers, the church you're going to.
Oh yeah.
And it's all falling apart. I mean, it's falling apart, and your perfectionism is just being very challenged.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was rough. I mean, I can remember one summer, after Dave kind of announced to me that he didn't believe any of this to be true. Because I, as the wife, like Christian wife, there were expectations I had of him to lead our family, to lead us in prayer, to read the Bible, to do all that goddamn shit that we spent hours on wasted. And he always fell short of my expectation. He was never good enough. And what a shitty narrative.
Even before?
Yeah, even before he left faith. And then like the leaving of the faith piece made it even harder when I was still in. I just felt just like I married this guy, and he just like upon one premise, and now we're living a completely duplicitous life, and how are we going to get through this? And can I continue to be married to him, as a non-believer, all that shit.
Unequally yoked.
Yeah.
Unequally yoked. Yeah.
So I have to imagine, I just want to skip to something joyous here, because I have to imagine, after years and decades of living with those kind of expectations on him, expectations on yourself, God's expectations on both of you and the kids, and the thing, I mean, what kind of freedom are you walking in now that is just
oh my
contrasted
gosh.
with that?
It is so glorious. I mean, I got tears in my eyes, to just be able to be whoever the fuck you are, to allow him to be whoever he is, imperfections and all, and just like we're kind of in a really fun space in our marriage right now,
Awesome.
Where you do you, dude, I'm going to do me. If this works out, great. If it doesn't, fine, we're going to be okay, but just this acceptance of just loving and respecting each other for who we are and where we are is such a beautiful space to be in.
Yeah. You're going to make me cry.
I know. And I don't have to say things nicely. I can give myself grace to be a bitch if I want to be a bitch, because I'm human after all, and I can call him out on his shit, and he can call me out on my shit, and we can be rude and disrespectful, and then we'll just laugh about it 5 minutes later, and we're in a really fun space. And that's one reason why, the whole empty nester piece come August 1st, I think is so exciting. for us, because I feel like we're kind of getting to do life, not necessarily over again, but in a way we
Absolutely.
are, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, a redo.
Yeah, and I do have a question about, I'm really intrigued by your experiences with the constant demands and expectations to be perfect. And I think everyone can relate, a lot of people can relate to that. I'm really curious about how you moved past it. Like, was it difficult? Was it just a switch where you realized this was all bullshit and you were able to let it go? Is it a long, drawn out process where you find these little bits and pieces that are still holding on to perfectionism? Is it being projected onto different areas of your life now that, well, now I don't have to be perfect with my Christianity, but now I need to put this somewhere. Are you able to relax?
Yeah.
It sounds like to an extent you're able to relax and be human in some areas, but can you tell me more about like other areas or how you got through that eventually?
Yeah. I mean, like dealing with my perfectionism was something that I actually was working hard in my last few years of Christianity, you know, kind of digging in deep and trying to figure out if there was something out there that really worked. I was involved in this mentorship program called 3DM, I think it's called. It's like an intensive mentor program. But I really worked through that perfectionism piece a lot during that program. And one of the big keys for me as a Christian, when I was still Christian, was the fact that Jesus doesn't want you to be perfect. You know, if you were perfect, there would be no need for him, for me. So you can't be perfect. And yet the narrative is such that you're always working, trying to achieve some sort of perfection. Okay, maybe you fall just short of where Jesus stands, but damn, you better get yourself up there, you know, up that ladder. Keep working. So it really didn't quite make sense. But on this side of faith, I don't know. I think my kids are in a different space. And I think as a parent, when I felt I need to be perfect, so I felt like my kids needed to be perfect too. And so like releasing them from that exhausting role that they played kind of allowed me some freedom, you know, to not allow myself to go down those roads. Like this morning we had our little local humanist Sunday gathering. You know, this morning I got up and I was giving the announcements, and then I had to do our introductory reading. And I practiced that a little bit and I did some research on it, but I didn't perfect it. You know, there's a lot of space in there for gray and missteps and misspeaks, you know, and so it's a process for sure. I don't really find myself struggling with it too much. I think the biggest area would be in my relationship with my husband. My husband is a mathematician, and he's a black and white guy. And for example, if I failed to give him all of the receipts, you know, from my trip that I took last week, that he makes me feel shitty, or, you know, for failing to do what the expectation is, you know. So I think I feel it more so. That's where I feel it the most, my relationship with my husband. But where I would have really beat myself up like about that and made myself feel shitty too, I just like, hey, the receipts are in the wallet. If you want them that damn badly, go get them yourself, you know, or I'll get them to you by Friday. You know, I can't do that right now. So I've been able to put some tools into place to kind of protect me and to kind of let him know that maybe he's the one with the issue here, you know, and that I don't need to always fall in line behind him. So I'm gaining my voice and learning to speak up for myself. I was a very bold, outspoken young woman. And then my years as a Christian, you know, I felt like I had to learn that good Christian wife narrative of allowing my husband to be the leader of the home and allowing him to speak for us. So I did that. Not that he was desiring that of me, but I just felt like that was the role that I was called by God to play.
Yeah. Find your place, woman.
Yeah, goddamn. And I am finding it now, and I'm crawling out of that hole, and it is a beautiful thing. There was a meme that I found the other day that I shared in our women's group, and it's this kind of an overweight woman, naked woman, and it says, "Take up space." Just kind of like, you as a woman have as much right to take up space as anybody else out there. So I'm still learning, you know, and I'm wanting to set that example for my girls.
Right.
to not be ashamed of yourself, to put yourself out there, to whatever. So I'm a work in process.
And the thing about, I hear this all the time, the word hijacked, and Dave Warnock's working on his memoir, and it's all about how Jesus hijacked his life. And I hear this, and I recognize it, especially also in my wife. When she was young and pre-Christian, she was bold, and I hear that in your voice. And you're talking about teaching your children. One of the things that you can do to protect your daughters from losing their youthful, natural, wild boldness is never introduce them to Jesus. You can do a lot of good in young girls by just never exposing them to Christianity. How much hardship and heartache can be avoided by just skipping this mess? And
how many more female leaders would we have if none of them learned to shut up?
Yep.
And we weren't living in a Christian patriarchal society that is just the water we're swimming in. So I've never thought of it until just now, Marie, but how many politicians and leadership positions would be filled by women if the culture hadn't just innately, well, not even innately, it's external, but it's a part of the culture to show you your place. Your place is here, and by God, we're fucked, man.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
So I want a couple of questions about homeschooling. You didn't end up going ahead and you homeschooled through 12 years with each kid?
We did. With the exception of my youngest daughter, she is my most social kid. Like my other two are more introverted, and they liked not being in school. My youngest, from middle school, has wanted to go to some sort of school. And here in Cincinnati, we have a plethora of homeschooling options. We also have a huge secular homeschool community that I did not find out about until my youngest was 9th or 10th grade. So she has pretty much tried every schooling option in our area. And one of those options was she went to public school for one semester. And then she decided she did not want to go back this year for her senior year. And primarily, not that it was a bad experience. She wanted to go for social reasons. It had nothing to do with the education. But she did not want to go back for her senior year, primarily because if she homeschooled, then she could graduate early. She could graduate in December versus having to be there until May. And so she chose,
makes sense.
Herself to not go back for her senior year. But
so what was it like? So you're still homeschooling, even though your whole family is now post-Christian. I say now, 4 years ago.
Yeah,
so the last 4 years that you've been continuing to homeschool, I mean, aren't you in homeschool coalitions and different things to where, what's the relationship? Is there tension between you and the other homeschool parents?
Yeah, well, I had a commitment I was a leader and a teacher in the homeschool community that I had been involved in for all those years. And so I had a number of year commitment. And so I felt like I had to follow through on that commitment, even though I no longer believed. I did let go of being the prayer group leader, and my excuse at the time was just that, I didn't have the time to do it. I had to concentrate on other things. I did still continue to teach, which was fantabulous as an undercover agent trying to encourage these homeschool children to use their critical thinking skills, be it politically. I taught government and history, and being able to kind of put out there for them that, not everyone shares the same narrative, not everyone has the same religious views or political views. And so I feel like it was kind of a fun last couple of years that I was in that environment. Now, it would have not been appropriate for me, obviously, to come out as a non-believer and continue to do that. So I kept those pieces of my story quiet. I did vocalize a lot of my more safe questions about faith, with some of the leaders. A lot of pastors' wives were a part of this organization. And I had seen when my son came out, of course, I was trying hard to keep him in, right? So he continued to go to this homeschool community. Plus, it was one of his only social outlets for the week. So I wanted him to go there to this. It's basically a homeschool school that occurs on a Wednesday, and you're there from 8 until 5 taking classes at this homeschool organization. And so one of the classes he took his freshman year was, in like an apologetics course. And during that class, he couldn't keep quiet. You know, he was voicing his opinions and his disagreements with the theology and with the worldviews. And so he was ostracized during that year. You know, the teacher had to speak with me and speak with him. The leader of the organization at the time had to come speak with me and speak with him and ask him to be quiet about his opinions and not share them. Wow. Because they were disruptive to class, and other parents were concerned that his ideas would lead others astray as well, you know? Yeah. And so I saw how he was treated during those years. And during that time, I believed that if, you know, I came out while my children, especially when my other two children were still a part of that organization, that was how that we and my girls would be treated as well. And unfortunately, in these sorts of circles, like if they find out that I don't believe in a Jesus any longer, they're not going to allow their children to continue to be in relationship with my children, you know? And so unfortunately, you know, we really have very few relationships left with those people in those communities, whether or not it's been a deliberate conversation that I've had with them or that my girls have had with their friends, or whether it's just we kind of removed ourselves from that environment and now we're living life in this other part of town and we don't come across those people any longer. But it's really a shame. You know, there is very little room for conversation and for questioning and for doubting and for allowing your children to speak their mind and have freedom of thought in that particular environment that I was involved in. A lot of wasted years. You know, I wish I would have gotten involved. I wish I would have deconverted sooner, or never been a Christian at all, for that matter, and been able to get involved in our local secular community here in Cincinnati, because it's pretty thriving and pretty rocking. And I think my kids would have had the opportunity to have relationships with some really neat out of the box types of people, you know? Yeah.
And then I noticed in your bio that, like, you know, pretty quick after you came out, you met Bart, and I don't know if you were at some kind of secular rally or conference or something, but you met a lot of the so-called heavy hitters of the atheist movement, and you noticed they were all men.
Yeah.
What the fuck is that?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, Marie.
Years ago, I had Wendy Marsman on the show, and she is a very vocal feminist, and she was inspired to start her own podcast, and she did, called Women Beyond Belief. And I think she ran it for a year or two, and you have since taken it over.
I have.
So talk about that.
Yeah. So, you know, trying to find community on this other side of faith was very trying for me. You know, I didn't know of any local organizations, and the ones that I had been exposed to were mostly run by men. And I just didn't feel comfortable or respected, you know, again, whether that was because I was a woman or whether that was because I was a newly former Christian, whatever the reasons were, it just wasn't warm and fuzzy like I wanted or was looking for. And I didn't feel like I was heard. I felt like those early, you know, conversations I had with a lot of the atheists or humanists, secularists that I met early on, you know, they were kind of dismissive of my story and dismissive of my feelings and where I fell in the worldview piece, you know. And one of the frequent responses I had was, well, that's where you are today. You know, talk to me next year and you'll be a socialist like I am. You know, like I just felt like there was like they were wanting me to come out from underneath of this one, you know, dogmatic set of beliefs and now enter into this other set of dogmatic beliefs. And I'm like, you know, hell no, you know, I'm not going to do that again. And so I just felt not welcomed. And so I found Wendy. I think, Cass, it must be on the EA podcast. I heard her. And so, you know, looked her up and became a part of her women's group and had some fabulous conversation in there, met some awesome women. And for me as a woman, I just was strengthened every time I heard another woman's story, you know, whether I could relate to that, whether I could empathize with her, you know, but there was just something about this women's space, the safety of this women's space where I was able just to listen and be myself and not have to worry about a man splaining me, and telling me how I should think and what I should think. I did that for 25 years.
Yeah.
Leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah.
So Wendy and I kind of became close and talked a lot. And I had talked early on about, I'm starting some kind of women's community here in Cincinnati, Wendy. What do you think about doing a local podcast, where I'm talking to the local women that I'm meeting? And she's like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's get that working. So it had been kind of in process from pretty early on once I had met Wendy. And then, the logistics of all that stuff just always takes a while to make happen. And so I started this local group, Women Beyond Belief. Now we call it Women Beyond Faith, where local women who have left faith, we just kind of meet up usually once a month for coffee and drinking and conversation. And I've met some incredible women in that community. And so then when Wendy was, just struggling with continuing to be a part of the atheist movement as a woman, and then deciding to no longer continue her podcast in that online secret Facebook group, like once we no longer had those, bi-weekly or weekly conversations to kind of hash out and talk through and encourage one another in, like the conversation in that space just it was ghosted. It kind of became kind of quiet. And so, I still wanted to share local women's stories. And I know for me, the first time I told my story was with Wendy, and it was under a pseudonym, and the amount of time and effort and emotional exhaustion that took place when I was kind of putting all those pieces together and thinking it through. Yeah. Because it was really the first time that I had really thought my entire story through. I mean, it was such great therapy, and I know how it felt for me to just to speak as a woman, to find my voice and to speak up. And so other women need a venue. They need a way to be able to do this. And so had conversation with Wendy, and she's like, yeah, cool, Leah, you figure that out. And it's been rough. I've had a number of friends that have committed with me to do this. And then for one reason or another, all good, legitimate reasons, have had to duck out. And, and I'm back in school full time. And so, as you guys know, Cass, you've been doing this for a long ass time, it takes time and it takes effort, the planning piece. And yet I tell you, every single time I have a conversation with a woman, and many of the women I talk to, it's their first time ever sharing their story. It is just, it's monumental. It's strengthening. It's encouraging. It's just like they're emerging and they're erupting and they're finding they're breaking out of some shell and, these burdens that they've been carrying. And I just feel like it's kind of like a ministry. I don't make any money. It costs me money. It costs me time I don't necessarily really have. But I feel like it's part of my role as a female activist to allow spaces for women to share their stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
I'm so glad that you're doing that. And I'm so glad that you have taken over the show from Wendy, because she just kind of didn't want to do it anymore, right? And so you just kind of took the reins. Is that what happened? Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Because I obviously, and I have no bias here, of course, but I like everyone's agnostic and, I say that with no bias. But once I found out about Women Beyond Belief or Women Beyond Faith, there was something that really drew me to that. And obviously it's a platform exclusively for the voices of those who identify as women. And there's a few safe places out there that have podcasts that are, led by men that I feel like, okay, I could go on there and use my voice and not have to worry about fighting them. But then there's a lot of ones that I would go on to, and I do have to fight a little bit and correct them and say, no, you don't get to say that about me. No, that's not what I said. No, but it's really, I really value the work that you're doing on that show and to exclusively get those voices of women. And I'm not just saying that again because I have an episode that's coming out shortly. Like it's obviously I have no bias at all in what I'm saying. And I guess I just really wanted to say I super appreciate that you took the reins from that. And I know that you have a lot on your plate right now, but I agree what you're saying. Like, it's such an important thing.
Yeah.
What you're doing. Women's voices are so important to hear. And I'm glad that there's a platform for that.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I tell you, there's one gal I had on. Her episodes came out, I think, last month. She is a fucking badass. This woman, she was abused multiple times as a child, had a horrible situation with a mission organization where they tried to, exorcise the demons from her. But the day after, or a couple days after her episode aired, like during the episode, she didn't want to share their names. She wanted them bleeped out. She used pseudonyms for them. But then, like the day after, she came out and boldly tagged the mission organization and the people that were involved, and named them and called out their asses for the abuse that she suffered at their hands. And it's just like to watch these women. I feel like I'm like their mama in a way. Like, I'm watching them just grow up and becoming these amazing, incredible women, finding their voices and sharing their stories. And I just feel like I'm just so proud. It's like it's just like so empowering for me too. And it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you're part of that, and I can tell you, you're feeling it, I feel it, and it is a very rewarding feeling. I had a friend tell me the other day, he said, would you say that when it comes to making the world a better place, that the podcast is the greatest thing you've ever done in your life? And I was like, hell yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As a pastor, I helped a lot of people feel loved by God, et cetera, et cetera. But I also, as we now know, I introduced them to the attachment of that is an underbelly that is toxic. And so I think the net loss in all those years of being evangelistic about Christianity was a negative effect on those people's lives. And they had to then, and many of them have, recover and get out and find the truths that Christianity had co-opted and, claimed to have the corner on, like love. Mm-hmm. Those are still true, and we can have all of those truths. And even now, just watching, here, this is almost a mirror within a mirror, but you right now on this show are making me so proud to hear your freedom and your exclamations of freedom. Mm-hmm. And, sitting here watching you claim your life back from, the hijacking of the Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. And Cass, finding your podcast, finding Everyone's Agnostic. I think I heard you on Ryan Bell, as most of us have, I think. Right? It sounds like that's a common story. Yeah,
it is. My show went from maybe 300 downloads a week to almost 1,000 just overnight after that show. Yeah.
That was so, hearing the stories, hearing that you could still be good without God. And, it really gave me room to breathe for some time, a community that I needed.
Yeah.
So thank you for all that.
So I was curious if we can go back to one topic, because I wanted to hear you, Leah, talk about it.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about women in the atheist movement. Mm-hmm. Leah, just because I feel like what we briefly said might have gone over the heads of men who don't quite get it yet. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you can talk more about your experiences of being in atheist communities that are male dominated, or talking to, or being, you know what I mean? What's been your experience? Why are women so sensitive? Why are men, why are we the bad guys? What do you think the dynamic is that's happening there? And how can men become better allies for former fundamentalist women who are trying to get involved in the atheist movement?
Yeah.
What can they do? What's happening, and what can they do to be better allies?
Well, I feel like I have experienced a shift in that just since I've been out in my local community, the Tri-State Freethinkers group. The first time I went to a meeting there, I just felt it was so unwelcoming, and I felt, kind of like a piece of shit, and I'm in the wrong space. But I've been able to continue to develop a relationship with the leaders of that group, the former leader of that group, who he now works for American Atheists, and his wife. And there's a number of women on that leadership team. So I have had this conversation with Jim Helton, who's currently working with me trying to get comprehensive sex ed in my local school district in which I live. I've had this exact conversation with him. So I'm learning from him. So it's kind of a funny role, I feel like, for me to play. Like, as the woman, I want to find my voice and not allow him to shush me and take over the conversation, right? As we're meeting with the school district administrators. And so the first meeting we had with the administrator, I felt like he kind of ran all over me, right? And so in the car afterwards, as we're kind of decompressing, I kind of mentioned that to him. And yet I also said, I realize that I am learning from you. And so you felt like you had to take more of a lead, blah, blah, blah. And so that has led to subsequent conversations with him about my role. He actually even called me a few weeks ago and just said, hey, Leah, I heard from someone that maybe I made you feel lesser than as a woman based upon this conversation. And so he just called to kind of wire that out with me. Is that true? Did you feel that way? How can I do a better job of hearing you and listening to you? So I feel like when we as women kind of stand up for ourselves and find our voices and aren't apprehensive to kind of making those comments back. Like, as a Christian, I probably wouldn't have said a goddamn thing, right? I just would have kept my space and kept in my space.
Yeah.
But I think we as women can play a role in that too, where we voice our opinions. And I find that even like in our planning meetings, for like our local humanist things with Bart, Bart's a big personality, and he can kind of tend to like roll over the rest of us in our planning meetings too. And so again, I'm learning to find my voice in that space too, and to say, well, we can just agree to disagree on that. I think this, you think this, neither one is necessarily right or wrong. So I'm learning. And so I think a part of it is for us as women to find our voices and not be hesitant in sharing them with the men. And for the men, just I don't know, like the more secure they can be in their own skin, I think the less intimidated and threatened they're going to be by us as women speaking up.
Absolutely.
So the healthier our men can get, I think the healthier the movement, whatever you want to call it, can be as a whole, So I feel like we all have a part to play there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring that up, because I think that's something that's not being discussed as much, like the necessity of men to do some work on themselves, to deconstruct the shit that's been put on them in their roles as masculine people, that there's all this anger coming from women, men don't treat us like shit, blah, 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 get straight, figure it out. And then there's less discussion about how men can strip themselves of that bullshit. Like how can we help them? How can they be helped to recognize the shit that they're carrying from being raised as men in this culture, with the expectations that we put on men. Basically, I'm talking about toxic masculinity. And I don't know. I think that's a really good conversation to have. And I don't know who's doing it. I don't know who's talking about it. I don't know what solutions they've come up with. But I think if we're just talking about an individual and what they can do to support women or any other marginalized or less powerful demographic, it would definitely be to start looking at yourself, and to unwind your own ego and start asking yourself, what are you doing? What are you saying? How can I get informed? How can I be supportive? I think that's a really good point to focus on the role that men can do for themselves in order to be better allies.
Yeah. And I tell you, I was kind of shocked and flabbergasted when I entered into the atheist community for the first time. I think for some reason, I thought that this was going to be like a way better environment for me as a woman to be in. And it wasn't. And so it continues to kind of be like a surprise, that wait a second, I thought you guys had more of your shit together than we did as Christians, but really it's just kind of a human thing, I feel like. And like we're starting, so we're having that conversation in my local tri-state free thinkers group. I'm having that conversation with, the guy that's working at American Atheist. We're having that conversation in our local humanist group too, for making ourselves better, more complete people so that we in turn can be better people with others as we love and as we serve and come alongside them. And so it's happening here in some small communities in Cincinnati. And, maybe it might take us a little bit longer than we'd like, but I'm not discouraged. I'm encouraged in that regard.
Yeah.
Well, I want to speak to this one thing that came out just about an hour or 45 minutes ago on this episode was how systemic this suppression of women is, or the pigeonholing of women. Like, this is your place. These are your boundaries. Get back in your cage or whatever, and stay here. And I think one of the reasons why you've discovered that the same shit that was happening in the church is happening in the secular movement. Well, I want to emphasize how systemic it is and how it's American. It's every if you crossed over into any other organization, as long as it's on American soil, as far as I know, you're going to feel the systemic stronghold of suppression of women. And that's why a lot of men are oblivious, dumbfounded, ignorant, and even like clueless as to how to change or how did this happen, because it's the water we're swimming in. And so if men can begin to figure out that and see the system, see how the system has screwed women, and then figure out how to not be a part of that system, how to deconstruct that system and work contrary or opposite of that system. I feel like that's what I got from the conversation about 45 minutes ago. Is it was kind of an epiphany for me to go, oh my gosh, the reason that we have fewer women politicians and CEOs or whatever is not because women aren't as smart or aren't as powerful or aren't as forthright or ballsy or whatever it takes to be in leadership. It's because systemically the number of women who would be in that race or candidates for that job or engaged in that university program or whatever, they didn't show up. They did not go to college. They did not go to this or that. They stayed at home, and the ones that got away and squeaked out and did go to college and now are senators and such, they're the exception, they're the anomaly. But the majority of the female population of America has had, knowingly or unknowingly, marched in step with the suppressive system.
Yeah. And even the women who are in leadership positions in the government are often seen as cold or bitches, or especially the ones on the liberal side are seen as in a degrading way called, feminists or anti-men, or they're degraded for using their voice. There's no woman in there that men are okay with. And I mean, whether you like Hillary or not, she was unfairly criticized for things that Trump was not even being criticized for. Like the clothes that she wore, the way that she spoke, she was very composed and very professional. She knows what she's doing politically. But she was held to this ridiculous fucking standard, and everyone's talking about what she wears. No one talks about what Trump wears. What the fuck is going on here? It's ridiculous.
Let me speak to that because I was watching Queer Eye this week. First time I've ever watched the new season. It was just the pilot, episode 1. And there's one particular guy in there who's the hairdresser, and he himself has long hair. And he's probably the most effeminate on the show. He swishes his hair around, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just as progressive as I think I am, it's in my bones to not appreciate how ladylike he's acting. And it just it's like that doesn't work for me. And if I weren't even slightly trying to be progressive, I'd be repulsed. I'd be disgusted. And that's in there. And so what that says to me is that I have paradigms and I have constructs in my mind that says men should be masculine, women should be feminine, and when that is out of sync, then you don't know your place. You're out of the cage. You're out of those parameters that I've set. So for me, the remedy is to, for me personally, or maybe even as a society, is to get to where I don't have a gender expectation as to how he or she is supposed to be, such that when women are in the workplace and some are more feminine than others, or what is feminine, and some are more cold than others, or some are more direct or speak bluntly, or however a human is showing up, we are coming out of an era of Christianity and men are from Mars and women are from Venus type binary thinking, such that we are going to have a hard time, and it's probably going to take a few generations for us to deconstruct and untangle ourselves out of those walls and stereotypes and paradigms that insist this is how you should be, this is how you should be, and there the two shall mingle.
Yeah, and this pulls into my mind the whole conversation that we've been having over the last few episodes about racism and things like that, where in that I think that the solution is just fucking letting go of your ego. In that, for me, the more I'm aware of myself and allow myself to notice what I think from moment to moment, I notice how incredibly racist I am. How incredibly racist I am. And it's not because I intend to be. It's the culture that I was raised in, and it was the media that I consumed. I see a black man on the street and immediately my brain goes somewhere with that. And I could either be embarrassed by it or push it to the side, or I can say, wow, I just had an incredibly racist thought. What people are saying is correct in that we are painting black men as dangerous just for having black skin. This is bullshit. I have racist thoughts. Let's talk about this. Let's be honest about this. So, I don't think I'm getting on a mild tangent here, but I don't think that I don't hear a lot of white people going around saying, yeah, I'm racist. I got some thoughts going on in here that are incredibly racist. And this ties into the whole feminism thing, in that I think it would do a lot of good for men, if you agree with this, that men are sexist.
Yeah.
Potentially. This is just a hypothesis I'm putting out there, that they were raised in a sexist culture, that it's reinforced by our culture, by our media, to no fault of their own to an extent. And it's like Cass always says, it's the water that we're swimming in. And so I think it could do a lot of good for all of us to step back and say, yeah, I'm part of this problem. Yes, I am racist. Yes, I am sexist. And I don't want to be. And I am. And I'm going to be honest about what I notice. And I'm going to push against that. I'm going to get myself informed. I'm going to read books about what these experiences are of these people. I'm going to maybe know more people and try to expand my circle so that I can see humanity as a wider thing than what I currently see it as, where it's a white default. So I guess I'm just coming back to that question of what can people do to be better allies for whatever specific demographic that we're talking about. And I think just some honesty about the systemic shit that you have inside of yourself. I like to think, and I like talking about this all the time. So you would think that I would walk around saying, oh yeah, I'm super woke. Dude, I talk about toxic masculinity all morning. So whatever, I totally got to figure it out. Black people love me. I could say that, but I think the more quote unquote woke that I get, the more racist I realize I've actually been this whole time. So I think it's this weird dialectic of accepting that you're incredibly racist, but then also realizing that your heart wants to progress beyond that and wants to grow out of that. And I think that's a challenging dialectic to accept. And I think that's what I'm putting out there for people to try to strike that balance, because I think it's true. I think that's the truth.
Yeah. And I have an interesting real life situation that just occurred this week that's kind of related, but I was kind of accused of gender bias in our little humanist group because there's a group of people that want to continue to have our potluck dinners, and they've kind of complained about us transitioning to these Sunday morning gatherings. And so I was trying to kind of connect them together and encourage them to kind of organize and arrange the dinners. Like, yeah, that's an awesome idea. Take it and run with it. Well, I reached out to 2 women in order to do that because, a number of circumstances that led me to do that. Well, the one woman is married to a gentleman, and evidently he's the one that has been interested in having these potluck dinners. So the wife of this man kind of said, like, Leah, why are you touching base with me? You should be touching base with him, So the next reading group, she wants us to have a conversation about gender bias in secular groups and organizations. And so initially when I first got the email, I was like, what the no. Whenever I talk to him about wanting to do this, he always references you, that he needs to talk to you. So I thought I was doing a good thing here. So my immediate response was to be, what's the word?
Defensive?
Yeah, defensive. Like, no, I didn't do that. But, obviously I don't want to bring that to the table with her, and so I'm considering, maybe I am gender biased. Maybe I am assuming the potluck dinner should be arranged by women, and not men. And that's how it works at my house. And that's how it works at most houses, secular or non-secular, whatever. And so instead of immediately, accusing her of not knowing my intent, right? Looking at myself and saying, gosh, maybe I do need to learn something here, at least in this particular relationship with this woman. She's offended by how I reached out, but that takes, again, I don't want to be all like, wow, look at me. But that takes a person who is comfortable in their own skin and not worried about presenting themselves as not having all their shit together. And that I want to learn and I want to become a better person, and that you have something to teach me and something to offer me. And not there's not a lot of people that I've come across that are comfortable, sitting in that space.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, because we're all looking for security. We're all looking to be right to an extent.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we're living our lives right. That especially white people, that we want to be good allies, and liberal woke feminist men want to be allies, but then they're constantly having their heads ripped off.
Yeah.
When they try to start conversations about certain things and say things in certain ways that they don't realize they're triggering people left and right and gaslighting, and they're just like super well intentioned. It's complicated. It's a really complicated thing to walk around.
Yeah.
Well, I like your proposal, Marie, because what I hear you saying is, as a culture, you're inviting us into a fundamental shift of how to see ourselves and how to think, and right now we're defaulting to righteousness and self-righteousness, and it is rooted in insecurity and our need to be right. So that's where we start, and I think you're inviting us to start with the assumption that we're not right.
Yes.
And so whatever you are demographically, male, straight, color of skin, ethnicity, whatever you are, start with the assumption that you are biased against everybody who's not you.
Yep. And
then when somebody says, hey, that was racist, or you're racist, or in this case, your gender bias, Leah, the default isn't, no, I'm not.
Yeah, right.
The default is, let's talk about that. That might be a blind spot that I have. And maybe even just, an HMMM, as opposed to, no, I'm not. So this is another place where we can start with saying yes, especially to an accusation. Let's just start there. And then as we together civilly and mutually respectfully unpack how that's showing up, then the truth might reveal itself more clearly to either one or both of us, and then we can go, okay, this is how that seemed gender bias, and this is how it was in fact gender bias, or whatever. Yeah. But start with the assumption that I'm wrong. That's that'd be a great shift.
Yeah. Sure thing.
It's like saying, I don't know, which is one of our mottos of everyone's agnostic. It's literally what we're trying to say, that We don't know. I don't know anyone's experience other than my own. Like, I don't
barely
know.
that.
I don't really know it.
Yeah.
And
Start with racial agnosticism and gender agnosticism and orientation agnosticism.
I know fuck all about the experiences of people of color in America. I know fuck all.
Yeah.
And I try to get educated and be supportive, but I think the sooner you can admit that, the better.
Yeah.
So, Leah, I'm going to wrap it up with some personal questions. But one thing in your bio that I wanted to get to is, did you went back to grad school?
I did. January, I started an accelerated Master's of Nursing program.
Okay.
And, being a stay-at-home mom for 20 years, I've been wanting to go back to school for like the last 5 years. And again, that whole role, my husband and I play with one another. And he's like, well, why do you want to go back to school? And I just finally said, I want to go back to school, and I'm going to go back to school. And just because I want to. And, he's all in now and can't wait till I graduate and get a job. But it's awesome. It's an awesome program, and I'm having the time of my life, and it's intense.
Well, congrats.
But, it's good stuff.
Is your husband still a school teacher?
He is. Okay. Yeah.
In the public school system?
He is in this year. He actually quit teaching about 2 years ago to be a professional gambler. And that went really well for the first year, but the second year, not so much. So he had to go back to work as a teacher this year. And he's actually in an inner city school, which has led all kinds of issues. He used to teach in a pretty upper class, upper snuff neighborhood school. And so now he's teaching Cincinnati public school kids. And it's rough. They don't want to be there. They don't want to learn. They don't give two shits about what he's trying to teach them. Disrespect is immense. Yeah, it's kind of a rough transition, but he's hanging in there. And
wow. What genre of gambling did he specialize in?
He specialized in online fantasy sports.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like a math statistics guy, and so he thought he could make some money.
So that first year he made over $70,000?
Yeah, he made big bucks. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So between your daughter making money off of YouTube and there's some creative money making going on in your family. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm back in school, to get a good job. A sustainable job. Yeah.
Up to the woman to save the family, as usual.
Well, Marie, you got any personal questions for Leah?
Leah, what do you like to do for fun? I'm looking at your bio here, and I'm hearing a lot about your transition out of faith and to where you are now. But what do you like to do?
I like to I love to travel. Love to travel. As a Christian, I think I kind of had this belief that heaven was going to be so much more grandiose than any place on earth that I could ever go to. So we would travel to the beach and to the mountains for family stuff. But I'm a lover of history. And since I've been out of the faith, I'm I am going places and to see the beauty of this earth while I can, and so I travel as frugally as I can, and like to see new spaces. And I go sometimes by myself. Sometimes I go with my daughter. Sometimes I go with my mom. Sometimes I go with friends. But my daughter and I just returned from a 10-day vacation in Germany and Italy, which was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at your pictures now.
Fabulous stuff.
Coliseum.
Just fast. In every arena, just to see how other people live, to try to figure out the transportation system, in Rome. I just love everything about it. Empowering my daughter, my 20-year-old daughter, to be able to make travel arrangements and get to places, letting her make plans and get us from one space to another. It's just a win-win in every arena. So I love to travel. I love to read. I run. I love nature. I like a lot of things.
How much do you run?
I've run 3 marathons.
On a weekly basis or daily, what do you do?
Since I've been in school, it's been a little bit abbreviated.
Sparse.
Yeah, but anywhere from 3 to 5 miles usually.
Okay.
Yeah, good stuff.
Cool.
What about, do you ever take time to, like, give yourself some kind of intellectual break or whatever, like watch something on TV to escape?
Yeah, that's a newer thing for me, like Netflix binging kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, what did I just watch? Oh, Madeline, the little girl that disappeared in Portugal with her British parents, like 8-10 years ago. There's a Netflix season. I love those like true crime kind of drama stuff. But I also did watch recently, Ricky Gervais
Afterlife
has that new piece out about Afterlife. Yeah, I binged on that a couple weeks ago too.
So the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
That's it. Yes.
Huh. And it's based on a true story.
Based on a true story. Fascinating.
So is it a documentary?
Yes, documentary.
Okay.
Yeah. I tend to default to the documentary real life kind of stuff, and
so give me the spoiler. Did they find her?
Not yet.
Oh shit.
I know. Sad story.
Okay. What else on the binge list? One more. How to Make a Murderer? Wasn't that one of the the Making of a Murderer? Maybe.
I think that was on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's that strange little town where the guy was, yeah. It's been a long time since I saw that one, but well, what's your plans this afternoon?
This afternoon, my son and his girlfriend are coming over, as well as my in-laws, and we're going to chill and watch some basketball, have a family dinner, and catch up.
Did you do a bracket?
No, I didn't. I was in Europe when the tourney started, so I didn't. Okay. This is the first year I haven't done a bracket in like forever.
I'll forgive you.
I know, it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you, Father.
For I have sinned. No. Well, it's been great. I wish you the best with the podcast, and I think I know, I'm encouraged as a man, but I just can't imagine how many women listeners right now are going, hell yeah, Helbing.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
yeah, they're taking everyone's agnostic off of their queue and just heading over.
Well, doubtful.
But just giving, your voice as you've shared gives license to so many others to go, okay, that's what this looks like. That's what bravery and courage and boldness looks like. Thank you.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. And I especially love seeing women supporting women.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks
good
again.
Stuff.
Have a good day.
You guys too. Appreciate it.
She's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think she's amazing, and I really am. When I say I regret not having, engaged with her more while we were at the retreat, I mean it.
Yeah.
I mean, and what I mean by engaged, I'm not talking about heavy shit. I'm talking about a game of Cards Against Humanity or something with her. Like she seems like she'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And no matter what she's doing, because she's, I don't know, vibrant, carefree, powerful.
Yeah, it's funny because when I met her at the retreat, I just got this, like, I didn't get to talk to her a whole lot. So the impression I picked up was like, oh, okay, this is just kind of a very motherly woman. Like, she's been a mom for most of her life. And so you just pick up these very motherly vibes. And I didn't really get to engage with her much beyond that. But then ever since she's got onto her show, and I've been listening to her there, I'm like, oh, no. There is so much more to Leah than like her motherly tones or anything. Like she's a badass, and like just talking to her today, like reinforced that and gets me really excited. And I'm super glad that she's doing the show, and I'm super glad that she's found her voice, and that I love that she's fighting with her husband. Like that makes me so happy. Like little things like that, just like, and that it's like, okay, like she's okay. She can do that.
Yeah. And I think again, this show for our male listeners, hopefully there was some light bulbs going off or some epiphanies, or at least some moments of being able to move into agnosticism from, certainty.
Yeah.
And that is, that when the arguments start happening, or when the pushback starts happening, and men are blindsided by it because this is all they've ever known is what all they've ever known. And in a world where the privileged works for them, by definition, that's what privilege means.
Yeah.
It can, I mean, we've heard this, we've seen memes about this where it says, when equality starts happening to a privileged class, it feels like persecution, or it feels like an attack.
Right.
And if everybody can move into that place where, I mean, because even I know it's, for some to hear you say, I'm so glad she's fighting with her husband, well, what you're able to see and the context by which you can say that with moral superiority is that has to happen. That's a sign that equality is starting to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're celebrating what would otherwise be something to condemn or not like or to shun,
right,
in a privileged society that wants to keep the status quo.
Right. It's a hard pill to swallow. Like, all of this is very hard to swallow.
You're telling me.
I know.
Yeah.
I've told you about it, but like as a someone who's white, like, it makes it so much easier. And we've talked about this, but it makes it so much easier for me to relate to the positions of people in power or whatever, given my coming to terms with racism and stuff. Like, I just didn't get it. Like, I just did not, I couldn't see it. I felt like we're post racist, and that everyone was just walking around really being butthurt and finding a lot of identity in being martyrs or being attacked. And like that, I mean, I wasn't like committed to that view, but internally I couldn't see what they were seeing. And I was like, I guess they're just kind of really into their identity as marginalized, I guess, but everything's equal now. So if you want whatever you want, you can just take it. But I guess if you want to be martyrs, that's cool too. And so like, that was kind of what was going on in my head. And in the process of finally realizing, oh yeah, guess what? Everyone's still super fucking racist. Like, it's been easier for me to see other things, or to relate to, in this instance, maybe men who are struggling to believe the position of women in the country. Like, there's a need for empathy. And I think you had one of those light bulb moments too, where you were like, when you understood that the kind of feeling that you have from the people that are Christian in your life and how they treat you can be superimposed on your interactions with women who are coming to terms with their understanding, or who are talking about feminism, who are talking about systemic sexism, that kind of thing, that everyone's got an experience of that. And if you can recognize that that's happening in other demographics and to other identities too, like, that empathy can make you a fantastic ally if you can understand what they're going through to an extent, and you can understand that you don't understand what they're going through to an extent as well.
Yeah.
So I know that had made a difference for you. I'll speak for you that you had talked about that earlier. Yeah.
And those are, you just listed, and I've just listed some of the major challenges of going from being a part of the problem to a part of the solution.
Yeah.
And like in my wife's case, we're going to talk about, Leah and her husband fighting and how that's probably a path to a good thing. The last couple of years with my wife and I, there's been a lot of changes. And at first I was defensive, as opposed to like what we talked about during the episode. Like, the default is to say, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
And that's where we start, unfortunately, as opposed to, oh, I didn't know, help me understand that, or some kind of humility or vulnerability.
Yeah.
But there's also that challenge for the suppressed, in that, like, for Mindy, I'm not just a guy that's standing in the way of her empowerment. I'm the guy that kept her down for 30 years.
Yep.
And so in order for her to trust and see that I'm no longer that guy, I have to earn and show some evidence that I'm now her ally and not her unwitting opponent. And those are some metamorphosis transitions.
Yeah.
You know, culturally, intellectually, emotionally, identifiably. Like I have to identify as a different way of seeing myself and the world.
Yeah.
Those are some giant paradigm shifts, and so we give each other, and I mean everybody, both the victim and the victimizer or whatever. Well, hopefully we're giving everybody the grace to make these changes, unless we see people doubling down.
Yeah.
And then they don't deserve our grace.
Yeah.
They can, you know, they can hear the brunt of like how angry we really still are or whatever. I get that. There's a place for that. But in the case where people are trying, I have to prove, and she has to give me the chance to prove that I'm no longer the guy that was the oppressor.
Well, I mean, she doesn't have to give you that chance. And I mean, that's
I guess if there's any hope for a relationship.
Right. If you guys want to make your relationship work and be functional.
And I kind of do.
Yeah. then there needs to be that opportunity to heal things and restore things. And it might look it might turn out looking in an unexpected way, but I could empathize hypothetically with someone like Mindy who had been in that's such a long relationship, and those are formative years, and her young adulthood, her regular adulthood, where she's subjected to your authority. And I feel for someone like in her position where that's a lot to release. That's like forgiving your abuser, and still I'm going a little beyond, I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but like it's something synonymous to that of like, well, now I need to reset because he said he's sorry, that he said he's grown, and I could see a world where that's not possible.
Yep, I can too.
There's just too much hurt. Yep. And so I mean, things like that, projects of healing or restoration in a relationship, I could see going a lot of different ways. And I don't think that there's a right way or wrong way for those things to go. Right.
And I totally agree that in many cases it will be a bridge too far.
Yeah.
It's okay. That's okay. It's the couples are going to have to go their separate ways, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
And we're working through that. And I think the beauty of what Leah said, she referred to it, and what I heard in some of her testimony, if you will, about her relationship with her husband, her role as the woman, etc., was, I'm no longer afraid to be without him. I know I'd be fine.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about, like, even if a marriage does survive this metamorphosis, where we went from a hierarchical, patriarchal, superior, inferior, submissive, dominant relationship for X amount of decades to equality, et cetera, then even if that relationship makes it, I believe that they still have to go through the gauntlet and the threshold of, I do not need you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise your decision is still influenced by your addiction and codependence to that other person.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I know that's common sense and not profound, but I think for couples that are afraid to feel the coldness of, I'm over you.
Yeah.
No, those words need to cross your lips.
Yeah.
You need to be over that person.
Yeah.
Because your addiction and your codependence and your validation as, whatever, as a man or a woman, because that man or that woman is by your side, is a lie. And it is an exploitation of another human being.
Yeah.
I don't know. These are things that I've learned and unbelievable amounts of personal. In fact, I was thinking today, I'm not anywhere close to the same guy I was when I started this show.
Yeah. You couldn't be after talking to all these people and hearing all these experiences. How could you be the same person?
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, like that platform, the podcast itself, but right under my roof, my marriage and my wife, our situation has been the most challenging thing and the most exposing thing as far as just immaturity, arrested development, and blind spots that I had that I didn't know I had. And in both cases, I'm being shown blind spots. It's just uncanny how a person can go through life well into their 50s or whatever, 40s, with so many goddamn blind spots. And the majority of the world is walking around with them as we speak.
And isn't this what we were just talking about, these blind spots? It's just saying, I don't know. It's starting from the default of saying, I don't know, right? Like blind spots makes, I don't know, maybe it's that I'm projecting meaning onto the phrase blind spots, but like, that's like, oh, I shouldn't have that. That shouldn't be there. That's kind of the assumption, like, or that we're fucked up for having them. But like, we're born with them. Like, it's just something that happens by having the identities that we have inherent blind spots because we don't know the other identities and the other experiences. And it's okay to have those blind spots. The big question is now, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And here again, you're pointing out the undertones or the subtext of certain language is judgmental. Yeah. And and that's what you're kind of feeling when in the phrase blind spots. And I hear you, and I'm not attached to that semantics, but the I don't know something, and I don't know that I don't know it.
Right.
That's what I mean when I say a blind spot. And so You're right. It's naivete, it's ignorance, and it's nobody's fault, nobody to blame. Just say yes to the fact that you might be oblivious to something that's going on right under your nose, and it's going on in your life. There are people that have, like, if I were to have a big zit on my back right now, not only could I not reach it, but I couldn't see it. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's there, and fortunately, I have a friend who's willing to go, here, let me whatever, pop it or Band-Aid it or whatever
tell you about it,
or tell you about it. Like, you got a tick right in the middle of your back, and it's
and they're like, I can't help you with this because this really grosses me out. I have boundaries around this. And then it's your responsibility to say, okay, I'm going to go to someone who's educated about this. I'm going to go to a doctor and get help for it. It's like, this is the parallel to getting yourself informed by resources that already exist out there instead of draining your poor triggered, people who are assaulted by their own, experiences every day.
Because the wrong answer is to the pointing out that there's a tick on your back. No, there's not.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah. I like that tick. Tick is fine. It was there. It's supposed to be there. It's my friend.
Its name is Fred.
Yeah.
It's a pet tick. Didn't you know?
Yeah.
Save face.
Just because I have a tick and you don't, you're jealous. Or I was born with this tick, okay?
Well, this is Sunday, March 31st on the taping of this, and my wife's birthday was yesterday. All my kids are gathered, and I need to get out of this studio and go be with them. So
okay, go fuck off, Cass.
Good talk. Talk to you later.
All right.